Good afternoon, and welcome to all of the alumni who are joining us for this third Thursday conversation. My name is Janeen Bertsche Johnson, and I serve as Alumni Director, as well as Director of Campus Ministries and as Advancement and Admissions Associate. Just a couple of housekeeping details before we get started. If you have a technical concern at any time during the webinar, please send a chat message to the AMBS webinar host. If you have a comment or question for our speaker, we ask that you please use the Q&A feature, which you can find by hovering over the bottom of your screen. I'll be watching for those questions and comments, and I will select the ones that I'll ask David later. Please note that the webinar, including questions, is being recorded. Turning now to our conversation. David Boshart brings a variety of administrative and leadership experiences to his role as AMBS's president, which he began in January 2020. Prior to coming to AMBS, David served as executive conference minister for Central Plains Mennonite Conference of Mennonite Church, USA from 2010 to 2019. Before that, David pastored for more than 25 years in congregations in Iowa and Virginia. He received a Master's of Religion from Eastern Mennonite Seminary and a Ph.D. in Leadership Studies with an emphasis in missional theology from Andrews University School of Education in 2009. He has taught for Andrews University and Eastern Mennonite University and has served Mennonite Church USA as a member of the executive board and as moderator from 2017 to 19. David will start by answering several questions I have for him. After that, we'll have time for your questions and your comments, and we invite you to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar by using the Q&A feature. David, thank you for joining us, and I invite you to start by just, what would you like to tell us about yourself as an introduction?
Thank you, Janeen. It's really good to be with all of you today. I've been looking forward to this opportunity to interact with you in this third Thursday event. Well, I'm married to Shanna Peachy Boshart, and that's probably the place I want to begin because she's the most important person in my life. She serves Mennonite Church USA as a denominational minister for Christian formation. We've been married for 35 years and have 3 sons. Our oldest son, Tony, is married to Tana. They live in Iowa, and they have 4 daughters. So we have 4 granddaughters. Their ages are roughly 3, 5, 8, and 10. Our middle son, Aaron, is single, and he is an entrepreneur in the retail marijuana business in Spokane, Washington, which has brought a whole new kind of conversation to our family gatherings at the dinner table. It's very interesting. And our youngest son, Corbin, is married to Mara Weaver, and he's on the pastoral staff at Zion Mennonite Church in Archbold, Ohio. As Janeen said, I graduated from Eastern Mennonite College and Seminary, so I'm not an AMBS alum. But 3 of my family members, Shanna, Corbin, and Mara, have all graduated from AMBS. Shanna and Corbin walked in the same commencement ceremony. I began my years in ministry at Community Mennonite Church in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Many of you may be familiar with that congregation. And from there, after 3 years there, moved back to Iowa to the area that I grew up in and pastored for 22 years there. During my last pastorate, I completed a Ph.D. in leadership studies with an emphasis in missional theology at Andrews University, about 45 minutes from here. Shanna worked for Central Plains Conference, first as a conference youth minister and then minister for Christian formation for 20 years. And the last 9 years, we had a real gift of being able to work together on the conference staff of Central Plains. And we miss working together in these new roles that we have today. After completing my PhD, I did occasional adjunct teaching at Eastern Mennonite Seminary, 1 course at AMBS, and several courses at Andrews University. I think I'm probably a bit unusual coming into the president's role at AMBS because I'm coming more from the area of church leadership than from academics. Past presidents have also been church leaders, but my area of experience has been much more in church leadership than academia. So that's a little bit about myself that I'll share with you.
Thanks. And could you tell us a story about a time when you experienced God in a powerful way?
Right. So the story I would tell is not like an instant or a one day experience, but I think of a CPE experience that I had early in my years as a pastoral minister. I think I'd been pastoring about 7 years. I took a sabbatical and did a basic unit of CPE at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, which is a huge medical complex. And so the interactions with the patients was in itself transformative. But as a young pastor, and in my first years especially, serving a congregation that had really high expectations and high process congregation, I was keenly aware of how easily pastoral ministry and church leadership can become about performance. And early in ministry, while you're still forming your identity and establishing your competence, your performance scorecard can become your sense of self-worth. And I think I really had slipped into that way of thinking about my life, myself, my role in ministry. During a sabbatical, when I took this unit of CPE one summer, my CPE supervisor was a Lutheran pastor. So his supervision was all grace all the time, which didn't make him a soft supervisor. But over the course of those 11 weeks, my supervisor worked really hard on me to be more grounded in my identity as a beloved child of God and less grounded in my performance as a church leader and in pastoral care. I really came to experience my belovedness that has nothing to do with performance. My supervisor really did believe that competent pastoral care is important, but without that fundamental grounding in one's sense of belovedness, it's hard to do reliable self-assessment. So in a fundamental way, this has shaped my identity as a leader. In fact, I would say it's what saved my life many times when my identity and worth was grounded in this identity of being a beloved child of God. It has sustained me in so many important ways over the years. So much of leadership can take us to places that are soul crushing when we experience challenges and complexities and disagreements in the church. And this identity has become so important to me. And I had a profound sense during those 11 weeks of God doing this work in my life. But it's still a disciplined practice to do. And in different seasons of life, I'm able to do that better sometimes than in other times. Certainly in a role like this at AMBS, where there are so many things happening and we're always striving to do things better and go deeper and to reach farther, it can be a real challenge. But it's part of my spiritual discipline to try to stay grounded in that belovedness. Every once in a while, when I'm struggling to locate that belovedness, the Spirit intercedes and I'm just gobsmacked by a profound sense of God's love for me. And in a recent update to the campus community, I mentioned listening to a rather warbly rendition of "O Holy Night," as that can so often happen. And even though it wasn't very great music, that line, "Till he appeared and the soul felt its worth," just grabbed me. And I found myself tearing up and at the thought that the appearance of God in human form was all about the human soul feeling its worth. Later, I think you're going to ask me a question about a dream that I have for AMBS, Janeen, and I think that's one of them. That every person who comes to this learning community will come to understand a profound sense of God's love for them and the whole world as a seedbed for whatever they're going to do in the future, that will be an orienting identity, regardless of what kinds of leadership and involvements in the church and the world they have, that they would know their belovedness apart from their performance because God sent Jesus to show us the full measure of God's love for the world.
Amen. What attracted you to be part of the AMBS community?
Well, my relationship with AMBS began probably around 1999 during my time on the board from 99 to 2007. I've always been keenly impressed by the groundedness of the faculty in the school, their clear love for the church and biblical theological integrity, I've seen as both a pastor, a conference minister, a denominational leader, that good theology matters. It matters a lot. And it maybe has never mattered more than it does now, with the complexities and the challenges we face in our society. I think even in this time of COVID, how harmful bad theology can be, really destructive, and how important good theology can be in helping us know how to navigate safe and healthy boundaries and practices for our lives. As a conference minister, I also observed graduates of AMBS serving as pastors, chaplains, counselors, and other types of leaders in the communities where I served or gave oversight to. And these leaders from AMBS were always so well prepared for their work, particularly in the strong foundation that they gained at AMBS. You know, you get this foundation, but you still have a lot of work to do in forming your pastoral or leader identity in situ, in your context. But I was always impressed by AMBS grads, and I would say Eastern Mennonite Seminary grads, got to give a nod to my alma mater, that these grads of these Mennonite seminaries, and let's say Heston Pastoral Ministries program as well, always came with a real groundedness for their work that I was always impressed with. And I hear this over and over again as I encounter our alumni around the content, that the learning community at AMBS is a very special place. Having spent the last year in this role as president, all the things I admired about AMBS from a distance have proven to be real in spades. We have an amazing faculty who are extremely earnest about their vocations, and they care deeply about the formation of our students. There's a wonderful spirit here, and the seminary functions as a very nurturing and empowering community. And again, I just hear this again and again as I travel, when I was able to travel around the church, and as I interact with leaders, that this is the experience students have of this wonderful learning community. I'm just drawn in new ways all the time to living and learning in this very special community at AMBS.
Well, we're so glad you're here.
Thank you.
Tell us about some of the projects you're working on this year in your role as president, and give us a short description of each of those. Mm-hmm. I know you've got lots of projects, so you can choose however many you want to highlight.
Yeah, there's no end of projects at AMBS, and we just created a new strategic plan this last year. And so, yeah, there's lots going on right now, but I'll limit my list to three. The first is a global Anabaptist education initiative that was really the vision of Sarah Winger-Schenk, my predecessor, to engage with institutions and church leaders around the world to strengthen an Anabaptist identity in the global Mennonite communion. In a study of Mennonite World Conference areas or regions, the histories were written for these regions, and a common theme emerged in those histories. And that was that there was a need to strengthen an Anabaptist identity in all the regions of Mennonite World Conference. So Sarah, in her vision for this initiative, began to engage with institutional leaders around the world, and at the invitation of institutional leaders around the world, to see how AMBS could partner with them to work at strengthening this identity. In this last year, at Cesar Garcia's initiative, we have developed a memo of understanding with Mennonite World Conference to collaborate with them and to work with the Faith and Life Commission of Mennonite World Conference to identify those places where AMBS might be able to provide theological and pastoral leadership education in other contexts. We're doing this in collaboration with Mennonite World Conference, but also in collaboration with institutions and church leadership organizations. Rather than just individuals or individual communities, we're vetting what we're doing in collaboration with more institutional connections. We also have developed a memo of understanding with Mennonite Mission Network that I'm very excited about, and they have seconded Joe Sawatsky to our staff to help us in the negotiation and logistical planning for places where we might be taking our theological education. And we've have a growing relationship with Mennonite Church Canada's International Witness, and Jeanette Hansen, who is serving in our task group, helping us think particularly about possibilities for Eastern Asia. We also currently have 30 international students studying with us here on campus. I think that number's right. I might be give or take. And we were hoping to welcome 20 more new students this fall, but they were unable to get their student visas due to travel restrictions, for which we were very disappointed. And they're deferring to next year, and we hope to be able to welcome them to campus next year. We have 2 cohorts of students at the Mesorite Christos College in Ethiopia enrolled in our Master of Arts in Theology and Global Anabaptism. And you know, that first cohort was a lot of hard work to get all the logistics and the internet capacity and all the things in place that needed to happen there. But we had a very successful start to that, and we were able to get the second cohort started this fall. What we are trying to do at MKC is to help them create their own capacity or build their own capacity for their own graduate programming. And in a number of other places where we're beginning to have these conversations in Africa and Eastern Asia, it's also with the intent of helping those institutions build their own capacity for graduate level education. It's a very exciting initiative. It's really hard work. There's a lot of complexity involved. We have to work very, very hard, and this is where our collaboration with Mennonite World Conference and Mennonite Mission Network and church institutions in other contexts really help us try to make sure we're mitigating the potential effects of colonialism in exporting our education here. And so we're working very collaboratively, trying to identify source material from their context, making sure that the educational goals of their context are what those institutions are looking for. So we're working really hard at contextually appropriate pedagogy and good collaboration with leaders there. The second project that we're working on is what I'll call the Flourishing Congregations Initiative. When I arrived at AMBS, I observed that our church has lots of knowledge about things like conflict resolution, and conflict's not a negative thing. It can be a very creative and constructive thing. But we have a lot of resources and a lot of knowledge in our church about how to deal with conflict. We should probably use more of those resources than we actually practice. And the church has lots of resources and pours a lot of energy into resourcing congregations to address our pathologies like sexual misconduct and clergy ethics and those kinds of things. What we don't know very much about is what's happening that leads to vitality and resilience in our congregations. And as we see the decline in much of Western Christianity, we're recognizing, I'm recognizing, at least in this vision that I'm sharing, that we don't have a knowledge base about the things that lead to vitality and thriving, flourishing. So in early January, I shared a vision to draw together the resources of the Church Leadership Center, the Center for Faith Formation and Culture, and the Institute of Mennonite Studies. So our Faith Formation Center, our Leadership Center, and our Research and Publishing Center, to build a knowledge base for understanding vital and resilient congregations, and to use that knowledge base to offer research-informed consulting resources for the church. This knowledge base does not exist anywhere within our sponsoring denominations. While the leaders of these 3 centers, Andy Brubaker-Kaitler, Jewel Gerinch-Longenecker, David Kramer, and Jamie Pitts, are all very enthusiastic about embracing this vision, and we're planning to develop in the coming year an asset mapping research methodology for building this empirically informed understanding of how congregations flourish. So even in our research, we want to be engaging congregations in this asset mapping approach that will look at what strengths are already there, what strengths are needed that aren't there, and engaging congregations and thinking in an empirically informed way, what will help congregations flourish. The third area, I don't know as a project as much as an area of focus, and it comes out of my own leadership studies background, is to take very seriously new data that we have and surveys from ATS that also matches surveys from our own alumni. Our alumni give very high marks to AMBS for the preparation they received here. If there is any soft spot in their responses, it has to do with preparation for administrative leadership or organizational management. Most seminary graduates in North America will find themselves in church leadership roles or roles outside of the church that might be classified as administrative or organizational leadership. Our graduates are very well prepared in the pastoral arts, preaching, teaching, pastoral care and counseling, theological reflection, chaplaincy work. AMBS offers a great philosophical foundation for building one's identity as a leader. We also notice rising numbers of pastors leaving the profession in North America and increasing levels of burnout. Pandemic is fueling some of that, but burnout and leaving the profession isn't due largely to disillusionment with the pastoral disciplines and the actual work of being a pastor. It's the energy drain of leading the organization, whatever that organization is, whether it's a church, a nonprofit, or some other organization. The organizational environment in which our graduates are serving and leading in many cases is a contested space. It's a space of conflict. It's a space that's drawing from many epistemologies or sources of knowledge. There's spaces where there's ambiguous understandings of authority. And so more attention is needed as we prepare leaders with tools for collaborative discernment. How do we do effective decision-making? How do we work at creative problem solving? How do we navigate the challenges of institutional power and racial justice in our institutions and churches? And how do we do process design and implementation? In the complexities of our world, our society today, the process of moving something just from A to B is seldom just a two-step process. There's processes of creating buy-in and alignment with vision and values, and how do we equip our students to lead in those kinds of processes, I think is a really important area for us to focus on. And then finally, I just say, this is just an area of focus. It's not necessarily a project, but in our strategic plan, we're very concerned about how we increase accessibility to theological education, particularly for persons of color in North America. We have, again, as I said, a lot of students, international students, studying on our campus. We have had a decline in the number of students of color on our campus. And we want to be working at issues of accessibility for them, as well as urban leaders. How do these persons see AMBS as their seminary? And how do they see it as something that's a doable education? To work at that, we've introduced some new scholarships. We have 3 new scholarships, one for those coming from an intercultural context, one for students coming in from an ecumenical or non-Anabaptist background, and one for M.Div Connect students. And these will be full tuition scholarships for full-time students, and they will provide up to 75% tuition for part-time students. We've also worked really hard in financial counseling for our students to bring down the amount of student debt that our graduates are carrying away from AMBS. And that has declined markedly since 2015. And we actually began this year with only 1 student requesting a federal student loan as part of their financial aid package. So I think we're making great progress in helping AMBS be more accessible and affordable. But I think we have a ways to go in terms of building stronger on-ramps for persons and populations, underserved groups who have just not come to see AMBS as their seminary. And so we've got work to do in that area, and I'm hoping we can give a lot of attention to that.
As I said, no shortage of project. So you touched on this a little bit earlier already, but maybe you have another dream that you have for AMBS, or several dreams, but what would you like to see happening?
Yeah, I'll give you a shorter answer on this one, because I think my dream for AMBS is really captured in the title of our strategic plan, Soaring with the Spirit and Learning with the World, or the Soaring and Learning Plan, as we use this shorthand. My dream for AMBS is that all expressions of the Anabaptist Church and anyone drawn to a Jesus-centered life would see AMBS as an obvious place for learning and deepening one's understanding of God's boundless love for the world and a life that is shaped in hope for peace and justice for all. I hope that my dream is that AMBS will be a a crossroads, not only here on campus, but in our interactions around the world, that we will be a hub for where people will go to soar with the Spirit into the love of God and understanding God's love for the world and learning with the world about how we bring a message of hope into this world, and that hope is a hope for peace and justice for all. So it's a sort of an aspirational and broad, not very specific dream, but I hope that dream is framing all that we're doing here at AMBS.
So David, do you have any questions for the alumni who have joined us today? Maybe one or two questions that you would like to ask alumni.
Yeah, I would have two. One, I'm just very interested to keep learning more from our alumni about how AMBS prepared you well for the roles that you're carrying, but also how can we be improving? So ATS is really pouring into this kind of research, our accrediting agency that is really pouring into research on graduates. And one of their studies that they're publishing on right now is a wished learned study. That is, what do I wish I would have learned at seminary when I was there, now that I'm out in a leadership role or a role using my education. And so I want to really be listening carefully to our alumni in terms of what are the things you wish you would have learned, or what are the things you wish there would have been more time to do when you were a student here at AMBS, so that we can continue to improve our programs to equip students for in very practical ways for the context they're going to find themselves in. And because the environment in which you carry out your roles keeps evolving and complexifying, what are the foundations and what are the actual very practical tools that you find yourself needing in order to navigate the challenges that you're facing? So that's one question. Keep the feedback loop closed with us. Tell us the things you wish you had learned, and how AMBS has prepared you well for the roles you're carrying. The second question, many of you, if you're alumni on this call, I think everyone is or should be an alumni on this call. Many of you likely received a market survey recently to a proposed Doctor of Ministry program that we are considering. AMBS has considered DMin proposals in the past, and they've not gotten traction, not been implemented. But we have a very good proposal right now, and we're just now in the process of testing with you, our alumni and others, about what the interest level is in the possibility of a DMin at AMBS. I think the DMin can be helpful after some years of experience in ministry. Either one can retool for new challenges one is facing, or brushing up on more recent literature in the field of ministry. But it can also be an opportunity to go deeper and specialize in a particular area of ministry that you've been in ministry for 20 years and you really find yourself energized by one particular aspect of ministry that you'd like to develop a specialization in. And a doctor of ministry can provide the opportunity to do that. I started my doctorate 20 years into pastoral ministry, a little more than 20 years into pastoral ministry. And it was a stretching experience to go back to school after those years away from seminary. I walked into the library at Andrews one time and asked, where's the card catalog? It doesn't exist anymore, at least in a material way. So there's a lot of learning and stretching that happens after we're out of the academy for a while and we come back, and that in itself is a rich and growing experience. It's wonderful to be studying again from within my ministry context. I'm also excited about the competency-based model that we're looking at for this DMin proposal. It's a very different model than we have used in other programs, but I think it's very well aligned with our pedagogical framing of knowing, being, and doing. Knowing, being, and doing is how we think about our pedagogical framework here. So we're really counting on hearing from you, our alumni, about what you think of this proposal. So please let us know if you think this is something you would be interested in pursuing.
Thank you. That is the end of the questions that I have prepared. And now we have a chance to hear the questions or the comments of those of you who've joined us on this call. Please use the Q&A feature. That's where I'll be looking for your comments and questions. We'll start with a question from Al Longenecker, and he asks, where or how did you learn Spanish? He's wondering if you learned that while you were in Central America or in Iowa or where? Yes.
Hi, Al. It's good to know you're on the call today. Al and I go to church together. I don't know Spanish. I don't. I mean, I get along when I'm in South America, but I don't. I'm curious, did I say something that indicated I know Spanish? Our conference, when I was a conference minister, had a very robust partnership with Mennonite Mission Network with the church, emerging church in Ecuador, and I was there oftentimes. I know enough Spanish to get myself, keep myself out of trouble, but I really don't know Spanish. I'm not literate. I'm not proficient in that. I wish I were. I should be.
Thank you. Arden Schenk asks, the U.S. has the largest wealth gap between the rich and the poor, and that is overlaid with race, since whites have much greater wealth than Hispanics and especially Blacks. How are you building the capacity of pastoral leaders to be acutely knowledgeable about these issues and to be able to clearly and humbly lead in their work? Thank you for that question.
That's a great question. And I think we're all on a journey with these kinds of questions. I think this last year has been a year, we've said it on campus here, it's been a year of reckoning for AMBS with the racial justice questions that have been raised and the tragedies that have happened across our country where racial violence has occurred. And I think there have been times we've been reckoning by receiving stories of persons of color who have attended AMBS who did not necessarily feel like they were, that AMBS welcomed their voices or that it was always a safe place for them to thrive. And so we've been listening carefully to those stories and trying to understand them. I think we're doing significantly better than has been done in the past. ATS in our accreditation review in 2018 highlighted our work in intercultural competency and undoing racism as a distinctive strength of AMBS. And that work, I would say, is increasingly infusing all that we are doing in our curriculum and in our student formation. Students are asked to develop goals where ICUR, intercultural competency, and undoing racism are concerned, that become a part of their formation process while they're with us. I think that our Bible professors are working really hard at bringing understandings of biblical exegesis that take seriously the power dynamics that are part of the biblical story. So we're working in those ways. Another way that I think the Global Anabaptist Education Initiative can really help us, along with the Flourishing Congregations Initiative, is that we're not thinking about these initiatives as ways we're out there doing things for other people, but we're working in collaborative ways that we hope will help build our understanding of the wealth gap that exists in our own country, and that there really is not a meaningful correlation between wealth and spiritual vitality. And what does that tell us about how we work together as a church and how we increase accessibility across the board for all people to thrive in their theological education and as church leaders? These are ways we're working, but this is all a journey. We continue to try to develop deeper understandings of these issues, and they're very challenging and complex. Should also say that as we work at intercultural competency and undoing racism, we, with the help of Nikisha Alexis, who you may have heard on the Third Thursdays last month, is really helping us think about these issues from an intersectionality perspective. So it's bringing all the complexity of not just race, but also other aspects of people's identities to bear in the conversation around how we understand difference in wealth, privilege, access, and power.
All right, Ken Quiring from Manitoba says, it caught my attention that you focused on missional theology in your doctoral studies. How has that orientation informed and shaped your leadership in denominational settings and as you lead in growing AMBS's culture? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I could talk a long time on that, so I'll try to be very brief here. So I think my studies in missional theology have influenced more than anything else my ecclesiology, my understanding of the nature of the church, and to understand that the nature of the church as God's primary or most basic agent of mission, of witness, I should say, of witness in the world. And a part of that is something that I think we have a really hard time getting our hands around. And that is the dichotomy that's emerged. I was just in a conversation yesterday with leaders of other institutions around this. The dichotomy that's emerged in theological education between Christian formation and witness and the outward ministry, outreaching ministry of the church. And why did those things get bifurcated as sort of siloed foci in the church? And so part of my understanding in missional theology is that the nature of the church holds these things together, that our Christian formation is not just for the purpose of creating only mature Christians, but the focus or the intent or the telos of Christian formation is about witness, about bearing witness, about the church being a sign and proclaiming the reign of God in the world, and that our Christian formation and our witness are both all part of a whole cloth. And so how are we thinking about that in our churches? I think it's a real challenge. I think our churches are not tending to think about those things as part of a whole cloth. We sort of do Christian formation over here, and then we sort of stumble to try to figure out how do we do contextual engagement or bear witness to our communities over there. So that's what has really come together for me in my own study of missional theology.
Carla Minter says, referring to congregational resilience, does your vision include a new ecclesial expression? If so, what might that look like for 5, 10, and 50 years into the future? Thank you, Carla.
Wow. If I had that crystal ball, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. That's a great question, Carla. I think that Ephesians 3 addresses this question, that it was God's plan from the beginning that one day the church would reveal God's wisdom in all its diversity to the principalities and powers in the farthest corners of the universe. It's one interpretation or translation of that passage. And so I don't think that, I don't know if the question is about ecclesial forms or not, but certainly ecclesial expressions is something we want to delve into in this Flourishing Congregations initiative. I think that there will be many forms that the church will take to express the manifold wisdom of God. And none of the forms, while each form of the church, let's just put it this way, as each local congregation is an expression, is a full expression of the body of Christ, no single congregation is the whole expression of the body of Christ. And so I think we'll be discovering, this is just a hypothesis, but I think we'll be discovering as we lean into the Flourishing Congregations initiative that there will not be a direct correlation between one ecclesial form of the church that will indicate thriving or resilience, but there will probably be lots of forms. And what I think your question is pointing to is the absence of this knowledge base, right? Like we don't know. And I love the thought of imagining into the 5, 10, 15 years, 50 years, what the church will look like. That's a fun exercise. But I also think we need to be developing our empirical database, our knowledge base about what can we know about the ecclesial forms of the church that lead to thriving, and are there any common threads across all the forms that are a basic part of the nature of the church, if you're going to be the church that emphasizes or leads to thriving. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to this project because I think we're going to learn a lot of things, and I think it's going to open rather than sort of prescribe forms, ecclesial forms for the church. I think it's going to open the space for imagining new forms for the church. I know, Carla, you think about these things a lot, and I'd love to hear your own imaginations about what the future of ecclesial forms might we imagine, might God have in God's imagination for the future. It's a very exciting thing to think about.
There are fewer Canadian students at AMBS than there have been in the past, and Janet Plenert from Canada is asking if you can comment on how AMBS will continue to serve Canadian churches and pastors given this reality. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. Glad to have you on the meeting today, Janet. Thanks for the question. I mean, it's a challenge for us to think about this, but it's always been really clear to me that AMBS has an identity as a binational seminary. It's become clear to me how important that is since I'm the president here. I was able to travel to a number of area church meetings in Canada before we got shut down for COVID. And I was just so impressed with my engagements with Mennonite Church Canada and the support I experienced for AMBS there. But there are these questions as institutions and Mennonite Church Canada begin developing more of their own pastoral training programs or theological education programs for church leadership. What is the future of our relationship, AMBS's relationship with Mennonite Church Canada? We are one of the few educational institutions, higher ed institutions, that will say very clearly we are owned by our sponsoring denominations. We are owned by both Mennonite Church Canada and Mennonite Church USA. And so we feel responsible. I was actually talking to someone who was suggesting that the relationship between Mennonite Church Canada and AMBS is maybe past and should be let go. And I said, well, until Mennonite Church Canada tells us they no longer want to own us, we're going to keep working at strengthening this relationship as best we can. My hope is that with programs like M.Div Connect, and this is an area where we have been able to enroll Canadian students, the M.Div Connect program and our Master of Arts in Theological Education, Theology and Global Anabaptism, that those programs can help Canadian students enroll in AMBS without having to worry about the border crossings, especially as we've had problems with that this last year. So we want to continue to expand our reach of MATCA and M.Div Connect. We also are very interested in increasing our collaborations with our sister institutions in Mennonite Church Canada. And I'm not inclined to think about our institutions in competitive terms, but what are ways we can be supportive to CMU and their new M.Div program, which has a more regional focus in its beginning. And we have the degree completion program with Conrad Gribble University College for those graduating with their master's degree there can end on pace with an M.Div at AMBS. So we want to keep those programs and collaborative opportunities in front of people. We've also just hired a new development officer, Craig Omstutz in Ontario, and we are, I'm sorry. Doug, sorry, Doug. My apologies, Doug. We've hired Doug Omstutz to do, but he's also going to be keeping an eye not only on development, but also on prospective students in MC Canada. So we're bringing a little more emphasis into his portfolio for that. I think that a great tragedy happened. I'm just speaking personally, and there will be people on the call who will disagree with me on this, but I think a great tragedy occurred when the denominations merged and we separated on the national border. I think there is so much for us to be learning across this border. And I'm so grateful for the ways that AMBS has been invited into conversations with Mennonite Church Canada, especially in the last month, the Table Talk gathering and inviting Sarah Winger-Shank, President Emerita of AMBS, to be one of the keynote speakers there. I just was so grateful that we were having that kind of exchange with Mennonite Church Canada and that very important question about the future ecclesiology of the church.
Jacob Fraze, also from Canada, has a question, but first he wants to just say how grateful he is for your Lutheran CPE supervisor who focused on being beloved of God.
Me too.
He also says he appreciates your consideration of theological issues within ATS. But his question is about our interfaith identity. As Colombians, we North American Christians face considerable challenge and opportunity relating to both indigenous and Muslim neighbors, and would welcome your comments regarding interfaith relationships.
Thank you for that question, Jacob. It's a great question, and I would say it's a very live question for our faculty at AMBS. We actually have one key strategy in our strategic plan focused on this question, and it really comes from thought leadership from one of our professors, Safwat Marzouk, who, as many of you would know, is an Egyptian Presbyterian. And Safwat has made a very strong case, and I completely agree and support his position, that at AMBS, one of the key things we need to be educating our students in is to be competent leaders who can navigate interfaith conversations in the communities where they're serving effectively and respectfully. And that I think is a cutting edge or a new kind of approach that we need to be focusing on here at AMBS because of the diversity of context that many of our graduates are going to be serving in. So this is an area we're giving specific strategic attention to in the coming years here at AMBS.
As we wait for more questions to come from alumni, I'm going to ask a question about how your new dog came to have an AMBS related name. And if I can share my screen, let's see here. Let's see, I'll show everybody this beautiful dog. There we go.
There he is. That's his baby picture. Shanna and I have always been dog people, but in the last 10 years, when we were both in conference work and as I started as president, we were both traveling so much, we were not able to have a dog. And during COVID, we decided to succumb and we adopted this little guy. He's a Cavapoo, a cross between a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, that's right, and a poodle, toy poodle. I'm told that the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel was bred for one purpose, and that was to sit on the laps of the ladies in King Charles Court to lure the fleas out of their dresses. So it's a lap dog. Anyway, we got this dog in March, and we did a survey we let the students on campus, well, students and faculty on campus, name him. And so we had a naming contest. I think we had 63 submissions, and the dog was named Charles Wallace Lambright, which we call him Lambright for short. And it's, as you alumni know, we have Lambright Center on campus, and he's named for the family that gave us the money for that building. That's our friend Lambright. It's very dear to us.
So, David, one of the things I learned was that your last name causes many people to stumble, and someone has asked how you would like us to pronounce your last name and if there's a mnemonic device to help us remember.
Yeah, I can do that for you. And I'm sorry for my last name. I've often fantasized about changing my last name to Smith because my life would be so much easier if I did that. And this last name of mine shows up in about 5 different contexts in North America, and they all pronounce it differently. And we pronounce it the least phonetically, so it's really problematic. But we pronounce it Boshart. So if you think about the heart in your chest and a shrub. Boshart. And I don't know why it's that way. I wish it weren't. And if it weren't disrespectful to my ancestors, I'd probably just change it. But if you want to say it the way we say it, that's how we say it. Boshart.
And we've learned that you respond to other pronunciations.
Absolutely.
There are a couple of responses to some of your comments earlier. Hostetler noted that some of the things he wished he would have received in his seminary training, which was your question to the alumni, was some tools and training for doing public theology and effective engagement in the ecumenical public sphere with other leaders, doing peacemaking, working on public policy and social change. You want any make any comments about that or not, or we can just let it stand. That was his response.
Well, good to hear from you, Claire. And I think our lives, your life and mine, intersected in those early years of ministry when we were both at Colombia Mennonite Church in Harrisonburg. So it's good to connect with you again. I think your comment is really important. And I think it's not unrelated to, was it Jacob Fraser's question about interfaith conversations and relationships. I think a part of the leadership focus that I was talking about earlier that ATS is identifying as a need in terms of organizational leadership and management is related to this as well. The issue of doing public theology, working in ecumenical engagement, working for social change, because there's a whole body of literature out there on leadership and organizational change and how we do change processes. And in fact, that field of literature is really exploding, and there's all kinds of even postmodern understandings around change agency in the social public area and also in organizations. So boy, preach it. Let us know your thoughts on ways we might be incorporating that more into our curriculum here or our offerings through the Church Leadership Center. I think that our faculty, and especially our new faculty, are thinking more in terms of public theology and how to be engaging from a theological perspective, the secular or public spaces. That this is a real important growing edge for theological education.
And one other note that has come in, Linda Shelley says that you communicate one-on-one amazingly well in Spanish because you care about the relationships and you're willing to do the effort that it takes. So maybe Al Longenecker thought you knew Spanish because you work at it so hard.
Well, that was a very gracious comment on Linda's part. We traveled to South America a number of times together, but I always relied on Linda a whole bunch for navigating the language barriers.
One more question for you. Can you speak to how COVID has affected AMBS this year and how we have adapted?
Yeah, so that's our second hour conversation, right?
Oh, we just have like 2 minutes, David. So the short version.
I'll be very careful on this. You know, I was in the office here not quite 3 months when the COVID pandemic began and everything changed. So I'm still waiting to find out what it means to be the president of AMBS in a normalized situation. It has changed things dramatically. Of course, we went all online, but we navigated that easier than some institutions because we have done so much online education in the past. Almost all of our classes have an online version, not all of them, as well as a live version. So our faculty, there's some stress involved, but our faculty transitioned really well to that. But we're also learning some things because of COVID. And I think whatever happens on the other side of COVID will not just be going back to business as usual as we had been doing it. We're learning some things about how we teach, how we offer education, how we gather, what's important. And we'll have some new ways of doing things that will carry on with us going forward. It's been hard, it's been stressful. Our students have been stressed. We've experienced some financial changes in terms of donations. We're doing okay, but it's created a lot of upheaval as it has for all institutions of higher ed. But by the grace of God and the tremendous support of our constituency, and because of the very hard work, the can-do work of our faculty and staff, I think we're navigating pretty well. It's gone okay.
And just to follow up on that real quickly, Hostetler has asked if there's a projected date now for your official inauguration, which got delayed by COVID.
There's still talk about it and with the board. I don't know what to say about that. There is not an official date. There is still a hope of doing a a formal inauguration at some point. I'm leaving that in the board's hands and getting about the business of doing my work here.
And this last question that has just come in is going to need a longer response, but I will name it here and maybe give you just a minute before we close up to answer. Henry Landis asks, after centuries of ignoring or weakly addressing sexual abuse, I'm grateful for our more recent efforts. I realize this is incredibly complicated work. I grieve the tragedy for all parties that has emerged around the Conrad Grable and John Rempel situation, and I regret the responses regarding John's contributions. So if you wish to respond, you may. He does not that you do a long response.
Yeah, I'll be very short here, just to agree with you that it's very complex. We were greatly pained by the revelations of John Rempel's misconduct. We are working very hard at AMBS to strengthen our policies for how we handle allegations of sexual misconduct when they occur, if they occur here. And we are right now, in fact, in a review process on our policies with a third-party consulting firm to ensure that our policies provide victim survivor-centered approaches to reporting, so that it's not the power of the institution that's trying to turn those reports away, but we're finding other ways for reports to come to AMBS, and to ensure that our policies go beyond Title IX expectations, but really do reflect the values of our institution, to make sure that this is a safe place, and that when people are harmed by others, that there are ways to address that, and that people reporting their stories are believed, taken seriously, and we find ways to meet their need as best as we can. This is a very significant issue and a developing area for our institution, as it is for many others.
Thank you, David, for answering all these questions and giving us an insight into your work at AMBS. And thank you to all of you alumni for your ongoing support of AMBS. Alumni are our most important influencers in the church, both of prospective students and donors. And so I ask you to keep encouraging people you know to consider attending seminary, even trying just one class. If you know of a prospective student you'd like us to contact, please send me their name and contact information at jbjohnson@ambs.edu. I also encourage you to give generously to the seminary. Alumni are a critically important source of our financial support through their own gifts and their influence on other donors. Finally, I hope you'll stay connected to the seminary through ongoing classes and Church Leadership Center offerings. If you are an AMBS graduate, there's a special audit rate for you, and you now have the option of auditing online classes. So if you'd like to take a class this spring, let me know. I also hope you can participate in the Pastors and Leaders event the first week of March. This year, because of COVID-19, it will be an online event, and it looks like it will be an excellent event. Thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon, and thanks also to student Becca Baratu, who provided technical support for this webinar. Next month, our conversation will be with new teaching faculty member Susanna Larry, Assistant Professor of New Testament. This concludes today's Third Thursday conversation. Have a wonderful day and a Merry Christmas.